So let's start. I thought you're going to give a review of the committee directive, and then I'd like to just briefly give a hypothesis of how I think we'll end up in doing that.
Absolutely. So this is your board's committee, and you can absolutely change, add, or edit any of this directive as you'd like. But this is kind of what Fran and I were pitching around the idea of some kind of ebook advocacy committee. There are a couple of areas that you may want to focus in on to start with, and then maybe branch out as you get more data, have more questions, or develop more interest around specific areas. So the first area that staff are suggesting is a review of library lending practices and kind of trajectories for both e and physical materials, so that you have a good grounding in where we're going with circulation and purchase patterns for e-materials. And Diane Cohen, who is on this Zoom session today, is our division director for technical operations, and she and I will both be going over a little bit of the background on that today. We also recommend that you start looking at barriers to usage for things like our ebooks and e-audio collections that are not in place through the library or the county. So things like cost, licensing limitations, and entities that won't sell to libraries at all. And we're going to give you a little bit of background on that today as well. We strongly recommend that you start looking at legislation that's already being moved forward in a couple of states, so that we could potentially draft or consider items similar here in Virginia. And I will share as well that when I mentioned this to some of my colleagues, I meet on a monthly basis with other DMV library directors. There was a lot of interest from our other Virginia colleagues in Alexandria in particular, but others in doing a regional approach to this. And then kind of the summation of this is, if you all decide that there is a problem that needs to be fixed, what should be done? How can this board and our county and Virginia advocate around this area? Is a legislative fix a real fix, or is there something else that should be done? Diane and I as staff kind of have limitations on what we can do around this, because really we're just purchasing stuff and there's not a lot of advocacy we can do for ourselves around it, because then we just sound kind of whiny, frankly, about the situation that we've landed in, even though it feels very much more than that. So those are kind of the directives in place right now, an overview of what's intended for this group. But like I said, this is your committee. You all can change it and turn it and do whatever you want with it. That's just where we thought we'd start. So that is your general overview. Okay.
But by the way, weren't we going to have some foundation members
Yes.
on the committee?
Excellent point. The Library Foundation is very interested in collaborating with you all on this and in having almost a joint committee. And so far, their chair, Patty Reed, and their finance chair, Mike Cullen, are both interested in joining, but neither was able to join us for today. So I'm hoping that when you schedule your next meeting, we can confirm with them that a date and time works for them as well.
And I can serve on that, in that role, at least on an ad hoc basis, since I'm on the foundation board as well, for today at least.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah.
Okay, what I was going to do may be too simplistic and a waste of time, but I thought it might be helpful. I'm assuming that the answer to your question is yes. My hypothesis, which we can prove, disprove, modify, or whatever, is that we'll be ending up taking 4 steps. 1, understand the problems that Jessica outlined that prevent us from serving the public the way we'd like to. Number 2, identify specific achievable solutions for addressing them, which I'm assuming that it will involve mainly legislation. 3, determine who we need to reach in order to achieve that. And it does appear right now that the state legislature probably will be the main target. Although I really think that eventually we're going to be playing on a national stage.
Yeah.
And then fourth, how do we reach them? And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to go over these four things is as we're working through the committee, it might trigger something in our head. And my experience from being on the other side of all this is there are two ways that legislators and staff are moved. One is by groups that for one reason or another, they think they need to listen to. And secondly, constituents with whom they have a personal relationship. Now, on that one, for example, a lot of us know people like Mark Sickles.
Yeah.
That's kind of an easy one, but we should be thinking of all other people that we might have a personal relationship.
Yeah.
And people we have a personal relationship who in turn have a personal relationship with a legislator. And then going back to the groups, I look at the committee, I see a public librarian, a school librarian, someone from the private sector who sees himself as a quintessential user of eBooks. And I'm glad also, Marion, that Fran added you to the committee. But each of you belong to a group that is a stakeholder in all this.
Yeah.
But I'll bet you're also in groups, other groups that might be stakeholders. I'm a life member of the National Education Association. And so I have some relationship, even if it's just reading their materials and so forth. And I'll bet you all have other groups that you can kind of get into on this subject and either help gin them up or help participate in their advocacy. If it's just writing a letter, for example, you could write it through them or support their advocacy. Anyway, that, as I say, is I'm getting way ahead of myself, and this is pretty simplistic, but I thought it might be helpful as we go through all this to kind of keep those four steps in mind, because I think that's how we're going to end up.
Yeah.
So, you ready then?
Yeah, thank you. And I think you were underselling the steps. It's so important to have a plan and to know where you're going to go. So even if we don't have people or timelines or anything attached to that, from the staff perspective, like, we are on board. We are so excited to know that there's going to be support of some kind around this. And you mentioned, we have a school librarian on here. This presentation and this committee is from the public perspective, but there, I am sure, hopefully, will be opportunities to involve our colleagues at the school site, because they face different challenges, but they are challenges nonetheless around e-material purchasing, distribution, and utilization. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have two windows, so I hope that I share the correct one and that you're not just double looking at your own faces, and we'll see how that goes. So let's do from the beginning. And can you all see the e-materials and FCPL slide?
No.
No. What can you see?
No.
Oh, great. Okay, well, let's try something else then. Let's try screen two. How about we show that one? How about now?
Yes.
Is it the full screen or that funky half?
It's
one?
the funky half.
Dang it. Okay, well, we're gonna not go in full screen because I knew I wasn't gonna get that right, but the information is still there and it'll be fine. So before we get started, Diane and I thought it would be important to share a little bit of lingo just so that we're all on the same page about things.
Yes.
When we're talking about e-materials, that includes both e-books and e-audiobooks, as well as e-magazines and anything else that is a single object, like a book, a magazine, an audiobook that you can check out from the library. We are not talking about databases because those are their own subset of content that we provide that have their own articles and things like that. So e-materials is inclusive of all the other stuff. We also might call it e-content. When we're talking about digital literary materials, that's a really specific phrase that can be used with legislative intent and has been used in the draft Maryland legislation.
Yep.
And it's used for a particular reason that we'll get into a little further on in our discussion. When we talk about our collection as a whole, we're talking about everything that we own. So it's all the print stuff, it's all the e-stuff, it's everything. And we'll say our print collection or our e-collection if we're trying to subdivide those. And finally, I don't think we'll get into this too much, but there is a difference between the amount of volumes that we have and the amount of titles we have. So we might have 2 million different volumes, items in our physical collection, but that might only be 1 million titles because we have multiple copies of those different titles. And those numbers are not correct. Diane, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what our volume versus title split is, but.
Volume is right around the 2 million mark, give or take a little. And titles, I believe, are 500,000-ish.
That makes a lot of sense. We try and purchase multiple copies of every title that we get so that it's not, you have one thing floating around and if somebody loses or damages that, then there are no items for anyone. Usually we try and buy at least 8. So over time and attrition, those kind of float away. So just a little background so you know what to expect as we're talking through this. And both Diane and myself will be hopping in and out on this. Diane is our subject matter expert around a lot of the data pieces, and we'll definitely have more in-depth information than I do on some of these pieces. And we also included a little overview. We've already talked through some of your committee overview, so I won't reiterate this piece for now, but I will share this PowerPoint after, so you'll have it as background content if you ever want to refer back to it. The next several slides are all graphs. And we wanted to try and make this as compelling and easy to read as possible, so it's not just a bunch of text. This slide shows you a little bit about the collection that we have. So our collection is our whole slew of stuff. And the blue bars are our print volumes, and the yellow ones are our digital volumes. And you can see that over the last, 6 fiscal years, our collection of physical items has been decreasing and our collection of e-materials has been increasing. And it's not a ton. The little orange bars are still very, very short and the blue ones are still very, very tall because the percentages are really far apart. We've only been growing our e-collection for the last 10 years. And we have had our physical collection for however long our library system has been open. And we've been refreshing it, obviously, as we buy new things and remove things from the collection. But that e-collection is still a very small percentage of the total amount of things that we have available for the public. Diane, did I miss anything on this one?
Nope, that's good.
This next slide is part 2, and it gives you hopefully a slightly better representation in comparison to each other. So the line can show you the increases that we have seen over those last 6 years in our e-material collection. And you can see it going up and up and up at a much faster trajectory than our physical collection. And that's in part because we just don't have as many of them. So it's been easier to increase the percentage volume that we have of those, but also because demand is so high. You all have seen emails from us over the last couple of years. The last one you got was that, FCPL was one of the top 40, 25, I can't remember, the top percentage of e-material circulators in North America. And if we, so it's top 40 total. And if we pulled out consortia, different groups that are bundled together, we're actually in the top 25 of circulating e-distributors in North America. That's huge. I mean, we're not as big as LA Public. We're not as big as New York, but we are pushing our materials and making sure that our patrons know about them. And we have to have stuff in order to do that. So we continue to rebalance and redistribute the amount of money that we put into those two collections. Diane will talk a little bit later about how much we're actually putting into these two collections, but we're constantly evaluating how much money goes where. Diane, do you have anything you want to share on this one?
No, just noting that the scales that you see, the scale on the right is for the ebooks and this digital, and the scale on the left is for the print, and it's about, the ebooks are about 10 times less than the print, just overall.
Thank you.
In general.
Yeah, we wanted to, so like this one, this number here is 2 million. This number here is 200,000. They are not the same scale. Thank you, Diane. If we start looking beyond the actual collection that we provide the public and into the usage that we get out of it, you're going to see a whole different overlay on the story. And please do know that 2020, we know is an aberration, is a funky year across the board. So we're not really using that for a lot of the basis of decisions that we make because it was just so weird. But in general, our usage of physical materials has been declining. You can see that here in 2015, we circulated, I think that was about 11.5, maybe 12 million physical items. And maybe just down here, not even close of the e-materials, both because we didn't have them and because we really hadn't built up a strong usership of that group yet. And every year, our physical items have gone down a little bit, again, taking 2020 out of the context on this one. And our e-materials have continually gone up and up and up and up. And think again about the fact that we have 10 times as many volumes of, 10 times as many volumes of physical materials as we do of e-materials. That we have 2 million physical items now and about 200,000 digital items. So the fact that we continue to see this shrinking gap of usage really means that there's a high utilization of those e-materials. This gives you an even stronger picture of that you can see this volume increase of utilization. When we closed for the pandemic and we put all of our physical collection money into our ebook budget, that only helped boost it because we have huge wait lines on things. And that's not even an analysis we started on this side. This is just how much circs, not how much we have wait lines on things.
The one thing I can add to this, to that statement, is when we were able to channel like all the collection money to E, our wait times went from an average of 45 days to an average of 25 days.
Which is handy. And I think I have shared this in board meetings before, and if I haven't, I should have. I am a user of our library system as well. I put both physical and digital items on hold and use them and read them. And I am 6+ months out on many hold items because we have people that want stuff and we just don't have enough money and resources to buy enough to meet those demands. We'll never have enough money to meet those demands. There was a recent foundation meeting where they were making decisions about their budget for next year and asked, if they decided to reallocate some funds into supporting the library's collection, would it make an impact? Would we really see a lot coming out of that? And we'll take any additional money we can for either the print or the digital collection. But in actuality, just to get to the baseline of what your board policy is, 20% of our budget is supposed to go towards our collection. We need at least $1 million more every year to go into the collection budget. And that wouldn't even start clearing out some of the hold lists that we have, physical or digital. I'll let Diane talk about this slide because it's fascinating and she tells a really good story around it.
Well, so basically what we're seeing is the previous two slides, it's hard to because print is so dominant, it's kind of hard to get that look, that understanding of how they measure up comparably. But so in library land, we have something called collection turnover, and turnover rates are basically how much does each volume that is in the collection circulate on average. Now, averages are what they are. Michael Jordan and I between us have, 5 championship rings. Guess how many I actually have? Okay. So that's, something to consider. But what this does tell you is how hard our digital collection is working. On average, every volume in that collection is turning over as much as 20 times for fiscal year 20, but more likely just under that at about 17 or 16. Because we increased the size of our collection so much, the turnover rate is probably, we're projecting it to be around 15. So it's working a little less, it's getting a little bit of breathing room. And there's a fine art between how large your collection is and how much each volume works, because we do have some items that are literally the moment they check in, they are right back out again. Those holds lists that are 6 months. And then we have some, where we get a simultaneous use collection, and some of the top ones are circulating, thousands per year, versus some of the bottom ones are circulating, 5 or 10. So it's an average, but it really does show how hard the overall collection is working compared to itself. So the print or physical collection is basically hovering around 5. Obviously, massive dip because we were closed for 3 months. And then overall, our average has generally been for the digital around 17 or 18.
And if you think about, so turnover is how many times something checks out in a year, right?
Yes.
If you think about the fact that our digital materials check out for 3 weeks, and if we're seeing those check out 17 times a year at 3 weeks, that's 52 weeks. That means things are always checked out. And of course, averages, that's not entirely accurate, but
sure.
Diane is 100% correct. That e-material collection works its tail off for us. It is, if you're not on hold for something, then you're a pretty lucky person. And even our physical materials have consistently stated about 5 times usage a year. That's pretty good in library lands, that, you're not really expecting every, philosophy book or history book or things that are on your backstock shelves to circulate all that often, but they're there for people who need them. And those popular materials and new things are really moving off the shelves pretty fast when we're open. So overall,
it kind of also,
busy.
oh, sorry.
No,
it
you're
also goes to the depth of the collection. We found out just how much of a popular materials collection we had in our digital, which was intentful. We weren't, intending for it to be a super deep collection, because that a lot of the deep stuff is more in print anyway. They're not even available in e-format. But that said, we found out when curriculum type support was all of a sudden being demanded, and previously it was all about more the entertainment or the lighter weight, not lighter weight, that's a bad, more narrative style versus reference style material.
So that's a little bit about our collection, but we also wanted to share a little bit about how we pay for these things and the money that we have that goes into them. So this shows the split of funding that we spend on our print materials versus our e-materials. And again, please discount 2020, because that was when we dumped all the money we had at the end of the year when we closed into the e-collection. But in general, most of our money continues to go into our physical book collection. So this is 2.5 million, this is about 3 million, hovering usually around 2-ish, somewhere in there. And then our e stuff is usually under $1 million. So like a 2-to-1 split in any given year. And as you'll see later, that is not a 1-for-1 ratio, because we do not pay the same amount for a physical book that we pay for an ebook. We pay quite a bit more on average for an ebook. But this is just give you an idea. if our collection budget is 3.5-ish million, about 2/3 are going to print and about 1/3 is going to digital. And this is just a different way to showcase that. So you can see the total amount of spending typically hovers like 3.5 million, somewhere in that range. Just to give a secondary portion of perspective on this, these green bars here are other collection spending, and those go towards our databases. So if you've ever utilized a library's resource or research databases, we've got hundreds of them. We also have to put money into those collections. And in the last couple of years, that's hovered around $1 million too. And those suck up some of the funds that could be utilized for things like our physical and digital collections. Before Diane and I move into the next section, did anyone have any questions? You're welcome to jump in at any point in time that something isn't clear or we haven't gone into enough detail or you just have a general query. No.
I have a query, but a comment, and that is that it's interesting for me to look at the parallels between what is happening in the collection at the public side and on the school side. The school side, we're much newer with e-materials because for many years, school libraries were completely shut out and no publishers of anything that a kid would want to pick up and put on their device would want to read. So in FCPS, it was only really where we invested enough to call it a collection, January of 2019, that we got started. So that was actually good timing for us to have it. But when I did my statistical report about impacts from our distance learning, our ebook usage went up 6 times in 1 year. So I made a note to look at our collection turnover. I'm going to find out.
Oh, and I'm, like I said earlier, our colleagues on the school side have a different challenge, but just as hard of a challenge around purchasing and sustaining their ebook collections. There's a lot of layers here. For us on the public side, there tend to be 4 specific challenges or factors when we're looking at purchasing e-materials: costs, licensing limitations, e-materials as software, and a refusal to sell to libraries. And we're going to go into a little bit more details on each of those. So the first is cost. And I'm going to pull up these 2 websites in just a second, but I figured I would start here. Many of us have read Becoming by Michelle Obama. It's a fantastic book. This is data from January of 2019. So it is slightly out of date, but probably still pretty accurate. If you as a member of the public went to buy this e-audiobook from Audible or Amazon or anywhere, you'd pay at that point in time about $25. For the library, who is still allowed to only let 1 person at a time listen to this, it's not like we could have everybody in Fairfax County checking it out all at once. It is 1 license, 1 user. It costs us $95. This is not a function of production because they have already taped this. It is a function of them being the publishers, thinking that libraries are eating into sales, and the costs tend to be an artificial barrier to ensure that we don't buy too many copies and eat away at their sales. And also because they can charge us that amount because we're going to buy it.
It's $95 for a period of time or forever?
That depends.
Yeah.
Diane, would you like to talk a little bit more about that while I pull up some of these sites?
That depends on publisher. This particular publisher, this particular audiobook, e-audiobook, it's $95, and that is a 1 copy, 1 user, which means it's a perpetual license. So in this case, we actually now have hundreds of copies of Michelle Obama's e-audiobook. Still doing quite well, actually. In other places, we can only buy it in what's called a metered access format, which means we can buy it for 1 year, 2 years, or it times out after 26 checkouts. And that is still 1 person at a time. And those used to be at a much lower price point, but now they're back up to $60. So every 2 years, if we want to, and I don't have one offhand, I should have, but if we want to get the Kristen Hanna book, that is metered access only. The Four Winds is metered access only. It is either $60 or $65. And we don't, it has no other option to it. We can only buy it in that pricing model.
And we'll talk a little bit more about those licensing limitations. I wanted to share, this is a website from our colleagues in Canada. So these are not US dollars, these are Canadian dollars, but I thought it was a really good illustration of some of the challenges that we see. This was produced by the Canadian Urban Library Council, and it's called e-content for libraries. And they have this just little rotating ticker list, and you can click through and go, oh, if I wanted to buy this myself, it would have cost $52. For the library, it's 104, 28 versus 87, 21 versus 109. And it just kind of keeps rotating through in a way that makes you very, very uncomfortable as a user and as a taxpayer in Fairfax County, that our budget dollars that are meant to go into a shared resource that increases educational opportunities for everyone are being gouged. That is my word. I'm not sure anyone else is using it, but I feel that way. Diane and I both get very soapboxy about this at times, so we will try and keep that to a minimum. Diane has also very graciously maintained this particular page on our FCPL research guide. So it gives you an overview of things like different publishers that refuse to sell to libraries at specific periods of time. Library systems that have refused to buy any copies of things from specific publishers because they refuse to sell one particular imprint to us. And our own ticker list. So this one you can see, you could buy this online for $8.99. We could buy it for $40, but we only get to keep it for 2 years and then we have to repurchase it. Or this one, Nora Roberts, we're a fan of using hers because she's one where it both costs us more and we don't get to keep it. Michelle Obama one, Educated. Oh, here's a fun one. Trevor Noah, great book. Don't know if any of you have read it or listened to it. We can't get it at all. They will not sell it to us because Amazon and Audible refuse to sell to libraries.
And of special note for this particular one, it was the audiobook of the year.
Of course it was. So there's some more information further in here about licensing models, and we'll share more as we go through. But we really wanted you to just have a little bit of background on how difficult it is for us to purchase and maintain this collection. You saw earlier the power that this collection has for users and how many circulations we get. And we have to put so much money into it just to get new things. We're going to continue to struggle to maintain a base collection if Diane and her staff have to repurchase all of these things that just leave our collection after a certain period of time. One of the other fun items, which maybe is not as much interest for the general public, but it is certainly frustrating for us, is they don't always tell us when things are going to leave the collection. They just disappear because they've hit their circulation cap and they just leave. And so we don't even always know that it's gone from our collection and that we need to repurchase it. So that's a little bit about the cost. We shared a little bit about the licensing limitations earlier. There are a variety of methods that publishers can choose to work with libraries on selling. So perpetual use, one user, one copy is exactly like print. We purchase a copy, we can check it out to one person at a time. When you're done with it and return it, it can move on to the next person. Metered access is where they remove the item from our collection after it's hit a certain capacity on either time or circulations. And then we have to choose to repurchase it if we would like to do that. Cost per circ is something that Diane and her crew have done for specific titles, like when we do eBook club books, like a monthly pick. We will just let anyone who wants to check it out, and we eat the cost for every single time that someone uses it. And simultaneous use is one of the few options where an unlimited amount of people can utilize that at a specific time. For a while, all the Harry Potter books were simultaneous use, and that was fantastic because they were really popular at that point in time, and it wasn't this consistent wait list for people who wanted to partake of those. Diane, did you have any other items on licensing limitations that you should talk about?
Well, there's two. I think the simultaneous use is especially important when we talk about how children use the library, because overall, historically, younger ages are much less deferred gratification, shall we say. So they're much used to, can I have, is it available now? I want the Harry Potter now, not 6 weeks from now, right? So that does create a type of barrier for our younger readers. The other thing is there is a new model out, which I didn't have time to update this. It's relatively recent, where we can now buy 100 licenses at a pop for a certain amount of money. It varies. And those are simultaneous use until all 100 are used. So I did that just this month for our ebook of the month, where I purchased 200 licenses for our heist, which is as in e-audio format. They're all gone now. And it's not even, it's what, three weeks in?
Yeah.
So, that's how quickly we can go through some of those. So, but
So,
it's a pretty good model for being able to buy something down or something that you're not sure, but it does keep it in the collection longer if it's not a super popular item.
Yeah.
So
the thing that we really want you to notice about this particular slide is, as a library, if we buy a print book, we buy a print book. It is our book. We get to circulate it. We get to buy more if it falls apart. Maybe we don't if it's not well used, but you just buy it. When you're looking at all of these e-materials, there is no easy method, and every publisher can choose to work with us in their own individual manner, and it is entirely, in my perspective, arbitrary. They get to choose if it's 12 months before it goes away. They get to choose if it's 52 circulations. They get to choose how much they're going to charge you for it. There appears to be very little rhyme or reason other than they know we're going to pay it because we want to meet user needs. And again, that's my minor soapbox statement on that one.
Yeah.
You may have picked up on the fact that we have used the word licensing a lot, and that is because ebooks do not count as books. You may be surprised by that because they seem like books because they are books, but they are not technically. They are software. Ebooks and e-audio are regulated like software. They are not regulated like books. So with books, there's the first sale doctrine. So if you as a member of the public buy a book, when you're done with it, it's yours. You can do whatever you want. You could donate to the library, you could give it to a friend, you could keep it on your shelf. It's your choice. There is no such law for e-materials. And so they have been bundled into this idea of software, which means that if you buy an ebook on something like Amazon, or if you are an independent author, you cannot donate that to the library because there is no mechanism for us to accept them. There's no law that allows you to give away your ebooks when you're done with them. All there is software licensing. So when we work with our providers like Overdrive, we're not technically buying e-materials, we're licensing them, which is why they can make up all these weird stipulations around how long we can keep them and how much we pay. It is such a convoluted process that it's often hard for me to wrap my own head around, but that is the reality of how we can purchase and utilize e-materials at this time. One of the really hard pieces for us to just have sitting in the back of our head is like, what would happen if the vendor that we use goes out of business? We don't own those materials, and we're often contractually obligated to keep them within a system we're already using. So like we negotiated with Overdrive, we have a contract with them. There would be a very difficult time if we wanted to move those titles over to a different platform. So that's just something set aside and different. And then the fourth item that is a factor as we look at e-materials in libraries is that some places refuse to sell to libraries. Amazon and Audible being the largest two. Diane, are there any others that you can think of off the top of your head currently, I guess?
Not off the top of my head because it's so dominated by Amazon.
Yeah.
There are others, but they're smaller niche.
Yeah. So I included a quote in here just because I thought it was telling. There was an article in the Post last month from an article called "Want to borrow that ebook from the library? Sorry, Amazon won't let you." And because,
Yeah, I got that right here.
yeah, because I can't help myself, this is the one that stood out the most to me. The tech giant has also become a publishing powerhouse, and it won't sell downloadable versions of its more than 10,000 ebooks or tens of thousands of audiobooks to libraries. That's right. For a decade, the company that's been killing bookstores has been starving the reading institution that cares for kids, the needy, and the curious. And then it goes on. Because these are not books, they are software, there is no obligation for people to sell to libraries. And if they believe that we are cutting into their sales, we may continue to see a trajectory where more and more publication companies either choose to artificially create new barriers for libraries to purchase from them, or just say, no, we won't sell to you. Before the pandemic, we had a huge issue with Macmillan and some of their imprints because they had embargoed libraries from purchasing their materials just to see how it would impact their sales. And the thing that they continually forget is that libraries are here to support them. We buy their stuff at a lot of money. And a whole portion of what we do is building curious readers who are going to go on to buy their materials. So we tend to find that as a relatively artificial
What happened with the Macmillan experiment? Did they ever announce the results of their?
That is a wonderful question. They were partway through it when the pandemic hit. And in June, I want to say, or maybe earlier than that, Diane, do you remember?
I don't know where you're going, but I know they revoked. They revoked in March. Basically, they said boycott, embargo's off.
Yeah.
You know, we're no longer embargoing. Please don't boycott us anymore.
Yes, and that was partially concurrent with the start of the pandemic. So we don't know entirely if it was their own sales data or if it was, wow, people aren't going into places anymore. We probably want the library's money because they have it and we want them to buy our stuff. But we had many publication companies who during the beginning of the pandemic offered cheaper materials to us so that they could be provided to the public. Priscilla, did you have something similar?
Yeah, no, well, what I was going to say is back when I was in YALSA and all these awards committees and on the YALSA board, library committees keep books in print forever, right? And bring surges. And so I just find it interesting how these publishers on the one hand court libraries because they want that award sticker or that award designation on their titles and then make it fully impossible for us to actually meet all the needs of our readers at the same time. So, I mean, it's just evil. There's no other word to say it.
And before you think, so many of us on this particular meeting are librarians and work in either public or academic libraries. And I try not to think of myself as self-serving and that we have looked at the data that we have from a unbiased viewpoint, because we want to spend our money on things that the public wants. But there are also a number of studies out there now that show that people use libraries to find things and then go out and buy them.
Yeah.
And it's not like a story that we've made up in libraries in order to keep the publishing companies off our back. It's data that we have analyzed over the years. It's just astonishing to me as well. So our last bit that we wanted to share with you all is some of the legislative initiatives that have been moving around. And this is a relatively new endeavor. In the last 12 months, legislative items have been introduced in Maryland, Rhode Island, and New York. The two in Rhode Island and New York appear to have stalled, but I didn't check up on them today. So I don't know if there's anything new or late breaking. The Maryland legislative item has continued to move forward, though. It passed their General Assembly and is with Governor Hogan. And I put the language of that specifically in here because it refers back to electronic literary products, which is one of the phrases that we shared at the beginning. And really all they're saying here is that if you're a publisher who offers things to the public, you have to offer it to libraries too. It doesn't talk about what reasonable terms are, because that is a very open legal statement. It doesn't require that they no longer use different licensing models. It just says they have to give us a fair chance to get these things for the public. It seems very likely that this is going to pass in Maryland. Hogan has been a pretty strong library supporter. So this could be an opportunity as a template if you all decided that there was a potential legislative item you'd like to propose to the county. In Fairfax County, the Board of Supervisors approves a legislative platform every year in advance of the General Assembly session. And agencies are required to get any draft legislation to the county's legislative office, usually in the September, October timeframe, same time budgets do. So this committee, if you chose to do something, you've got about 4 months to work on something. Doesn't have to be clear draft language, just has to be an idea of what you want. So that is the extent of our kind of presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I hope that that was not way too much information, but we wanted you to have a good grounding to start with. So, yeah.
Jessica, I got kind of a simple question. How can a state tell a publisher in another state what to do with customers in the state?
That's a great question that I don't have a good answer to. I assume that it has less to do with the publishing company being in another state and more with the fact that the people purchasing it are in the state where they are able to legislate. So if Amazon is selling ebooks to people who live in Maryland, then Amazon also needs to offer up those ebooks to libraries in Maryland.
But how can you enforce that?
So I mean, I don't know anything specific in the publishing field, but I do know in education, for example, the great state of Texas has some requirements around textbooks in Texas that really force textbook publishers to just make those changes, sometimes to the frustration of other states who don't agree with Texas, but in California too, there are a lot of rules even around food distribution or, you know, all different kinds of aspects of life that if there's enough volume of people who are saying this needs to occur, it becomes something that they can't do. I don't think about the wording here, but it's providing leverage because all of a sudden they can't have 50 different versions for custom to each state. And so it becomes more of a collective pressure. And I don't know that that would necessarily happen so quickly if we just in Virginia added to this, but you know, it would likely generate more attention to it. I don't know if that's really an answer.
And
It wouldn't address refusal to sell.
Yeah, I can check in with the Maryland Library Association
Okay.
and see, because we haven't done any reach out to our colleagues in Maryland yet. So I don't know what their goal was. Diane? Yeah.
I reached out to Michael over at St. Mary's, who was part of the process to get that approved in Maryland, and he is more than happy to be contacted and talk to us about some of the things. He did speak to that question the other day on a webinar, but it was very eloquent, and honestly, I was so gobsmacked by how eloquent it was that I didn't write it down because I was like, oh, that's excellent. You know, that makes so much sense. So I'll have that next go round, but he's going to be a good resource, I think, to talk about. And I think the Publishers Weekly may have addressed that because the American Association of AAPU, the Publishing Association, basically came out and was like, you can't do this because copyright. And
Yeah.
the response was software license, only in a much more eloquent way. So that's a really salient question, and one we can know more about from their experience.
I got a question. I'm very time sensitive. I'm gonna have to jump off in like 5 minutes. So the second part of the question is like, what is the next steps? But the first steps for me seem to be to do the research to find out what efforts have been made up to date. We talked about legislation. or any other efforts being done. And I don't know the right way to research that, but I think I need that foundation before I have a strong voice. Those are great presentation with statistics. I know that materials are increasing because it's all I use now. And I use it more frequently. So I guess the question is, where can I find more information, and two, what are the next steps?
That's a great one. So what Diane and I can do, Gary, if you are amenable, is we can compile some online resources that can give us a good starting point. And we'll post those for the public as well as part of your agenda for your next meeting so that it's accessible for everyone. And the Maryland legislative item was pretty closely drafted to what New York and Rhode Island had. It wasn't that different. So they're all kind of in the same boat about what they were looking at for this. But we'll pull together some additional resources. The next steps, the only things that we're recommending at this point are, if you all have any data that you're looking for from us, things that would help you kind of better understand the problem, either from a local perspective or across Virginia. We can't get everything, but we can try. And I will provide the timeline for the legislative process for the county, just so that you've got a better understanding of kind of deadlines on that if you choose to move forward. But really, it's up to you all what you think would be the next good step. If Gary is saying, understand the problem and what are those solutions, and then how and when, that could be some of your next meeting is developing those.
The first thing I said to Fran when she called me about this, and I'll try to say this more delicately than I said it to her, it would seem to me that the ALA, this is a life and death situation for them. Well, it would just seem that they'd be so much on top of this that we almost wouldn't have to do any research.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that really well. So this has been a problem for us as an industry for more than a decade. And it has been argued about and negotiated and communicated for more than a decade. And for a long time, we tried to play really nice with the publishers. Like, if we're nice to you and we give you all our money, maybe you will do nice things back for us and not gouge us in the prices. And that has not been a tactic that's worked well for us. And like I said at the beginning, it frequently feels like we're self-serving when we as library staff and library associations advocate around this, that maybe we're just saying it because we want more money for something else, which is not accurate. So having outside groups or other members of the public and boards that can advocate on our behalf, I am hoping that this will continue to help us.
right. I just like to say, I think that, I know that we're not looking at 2020 for a lot of figures, but I think this is an issue that the public is completely unaware of. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about this coming in, and I've learned a lot just from your presentation with your statistics and the definitions of words. During this last year, I walk a lot in my neighborhood. I walk in different parks. Everybody has an earbud on. They're all listening to books on tape. And I know that people are using the library for them, or they don't have a clue that Amazon has put these restrictions and these licensing taboos on the library. It's totally an invisible pandemic of its own. And I think that if we just let friends and neighbors and local community organizations know what's going on, that we would probably have a groundswell of advocacy for the library. And I don't know how we get that through statistics, because I tend to look at the world from my little personal anecdotes, but I think that this is a huge issue.
Well, it can be both the head and the heart, because those will hit different people. If you give the stories and you back them up with figures,
Yeah,
that's how it works. And
exactly.
if we're planning forward around next steps, there are impacts to this at the local, state, and national level, right? At the local level, our tax dollars are not being well spent. Because
Exactly.
we cannot keep paying this much money for things
Right.
that the public is expecting us to be a good steward of their resources. And
Right,
we
right.
cannot be if we're required to spend this much money on things that shouldn't cost that much.
And that issue in itself, I think that, I just know that people think, oh, the library gets books cheaper than we do, which is not true. I know that. But I had no idea that the discrepancy between a print book and an ebook was so high, 3 times as. So,
Keith, we'll see you next time.
Jessica, my concern with the ALA isn't so much that they haven't been effective. That's understandable because we have to do what Sheila's talking about.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is to understand the issue and the solution
yeah,
that they should have in spades for us.
They do. So I'm going to copy into the chat their ebook advocacy page. It is bulky. There are a lot of resources in there. So there's information about how to get started around advocacy. There's information around yeah. There's a lot in there, but I'm not going to say it's the most up to date. This has not been maybe the priority for them throughout the pandemic, right? Diane, do you?
And that's true. And one of the other challenges, I think, is ALA serves all types of libraries. And public libraries have a different need than academic libraries, than a different need than K through 12. There is some overlap, but coming to consensus on how to approach a particular problem, much of what I've seen in ALA or the groups I've been looking at talk about needing national legislation, and there just isn't a whole lot of unification behind that. Till recently, after the pandemic kind of was like, oh, look,
Yeah. Our national association is really strong in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But they have so many focus points. There's so many of them that they can often get caught up in minutia for things. I think that a ground level process is going to work better on this one, because we have tried for a decade to use other processes and it just hasn't worked. So there's got to be some way to break through on this. And if it's those one-on-one interactions, if it's knowing your legislator, I don't know what it's going to end up being, but the tactic that we've been trying to use just hasn't worked. So.
But again, I'm not talking about the tactic. I'm talking about we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel to understand this. We should be able to get it almost instantaneous.
Should. Yes, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just, I have found, actually, I'll include the link to this too. Our Urban Library Council has a really strong ebook advocacy guide that might be more helpful. The ALA one is embedded in other advocacy efforts, so it is one aspect of what they're doing. There we go.
Yeah, and kind of following on the one aspect is even in a conversation of a ALA committee that I was speaking with on a similar topic, when we talked about accessibility, we had to break it down into, are we talking about accessibility as in disability and cognitive versus, sensory, or we were talking about accessibility as in broadband and the very access capability. And, it was like, well, we've got another group working on the broadband and access in that relation. And so it was a very interesting kind of bigger issue about what do we, when we're talking about equitable access, broadband becomes, and the infrastructure of broadband became its own discussion. And so it's trying to hone together so much at the association level, because they have to look at all of that.
So Gary, to your original point that there should be some kind of site that's already got all the background information so you can just kind of dive in, the Urban Library Council site, I think, is the best option. It It has an overview of the issue by Priscilla. It talks about the problem. It has a series of FAQs. It's partially out of date because a lot of this was developed when we were fighting against the embargoes that were put in place by many of the publishing companies that then went away during the pandemic. But the baseline information is all there and it's good.
Okay.
So that was kind of where we wanted to share to start. And it looks like you've lost
Everybody, but
everybody on your committee except for Sheila. So if you'd like, I can help set up your next meeting date via an email poll.
Yeah, I guess I talked too much.
no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
No. Could I just ask one more thing?
Oh yeah, as long as you want.
Legally, I mean, I've been looking, I mean, I read all of the information that you had sent, and, you know, I've been kind of following it kind of not as seriously as I am now, but it seemed like legally there's much more to it than what impacts us. Like, this is a monopoly, so I can't imagine that this isn't going to be addressed as, you know, monopoly of one business, Amazon taking over the whole publishing. And then copyright, I was trying to follow what that had to do with it. And because they kept mentioning copyright. And when I think of copyright, I think of, you know, a person's body of work. I don't think so. I mean, it's so big. So I'm with you, Gary. I wish that there was one place that really kind of put it all out.
So there's a portion of, so this is from a Publishers Weekly article that came out on March 26th, and it's called Library eBook Bill Advancing in Maryland, just in case anyone wants to go back and cite it later. And there's a portion in here that is a rebuttal to the concerns that were brought forward by the publishing community around things like copyright. And it says, the bills do not force publishers to transfer any of their exclusive rights, and the publisher's rights remain undiminished. The bill prevents unreasonable discrimination against public libraries. The person writing this explained that the legislation simply provides that if a publisher licenses an ebook to the public in Maryland, the publisher must also make those licenses available to the public or public libraries as well. The author then continues that Publishers Weekly told Publishers Weekly that publishers can't have it both ways, using the concept of ebooks as a licensed product, like the software we talked about, to deny libraries the right to buy and lend digital versions of literary works, a right that they enjoy under copyright law, while claiming that copyright law forbids the state from imposing what they're calling a modest condition. They're trying to get it both ways. That's what they're really saying, that we all, as members of the public, if you buy an ebook on Amazon or somewhere else, you don't own that ebook. You're licensing it the same way that libraries license it. And so what they're saying is, if you're treating it like a piece of software for a member of the public, you have to treat it like a piece of software for a library as well. You can't just say, no, you can't have it. And if you want it to be a copyright item, then it's not software, it's a book. And the right of first sale should be imposed upon it as well. So it's really tricky and really interesting to try and figure out. Because I'm not a lawyer, so it's just kind of.
No, I'm not either. It'll be interesting to condense this and to translate it down to our exact needs, as opposed to the more global questions that are coming up.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Hi, Fran.
Hi, I've been to Mars and back.
Gary, the library's marketing director, Erin Julius, is on this session as well. She's just been muted and her camera off. She wanted to know if she could ask a question.
Sure.
I'll even put my camera on. So my question, I play the devil's advocate a lot, because if there's a question out there, it's going to come to me. So taking the perspective of, say, an author, I think the fairest comparison would be, is there data about how many times your average print book, so how many times would one of Michelle Obama's books in print have been read before a library would have had to replace it because of the book's life cycle? And because the problem, I mean, I understand the higher cost of a digital title, because they could last in perpetuity. I mean, they're not going to fall apart. They're not going to get coffee spilled on them. So is that addressed somewhere?
Many, many moons ago, many years ago, that was when they first started selling to libraries. That's where the 26 checkouts came out, and they declared 26 to be the average. At which point, most public libraries just laughed.
Yeah, times up by 10.
Yeah, because our children's books, we have children's books that will circulate 180, 190 times. We have CDs that we start pulling at the age of 75 or 80 after 80 circs. We have print books that may have 100 circs on them that look fine, and others that might have 10 circulations, but the dog got to it, so out it goes. So we don't have an official number, but I do know, I can tell you 26 is too low. So when we're talking about the natural life cycle of a book that digital doesn't necessarily have, I think that's a good touch point, but we don't have, and that data isn't collected on the regular because the ILS has never captured that data of the book on its way out, or it aggregated it, so you couldn't really get a good picture of it.
And ILS is our integrated library system. It's the system used to check out materials and you place holds on. One thing that I think is important to note is that they can both charge us a higher cost and they can limit how long we keep it.
Right.
So they're effectively double dipping, that if you want to use the methodology that if we as a library buy a physical book, we're going to get rid of it after a certain number of checkouts because it's worn and torn, and buy a new one, that's fine. We'll pay a higher cost, or we'll have it circulate a number of times, but we have so many of them, they're doing both. You can keep this for 2 years and you have to pay $96. It's not, it feels very unfair.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Are there any prominent authors who speak on this?
There are many prominent authors that support libraries in general. Like Neil Gaiman is a personal favorite of mine. He is strongly pro-library. I don't know of any that are focusing on this topic though. Diane, are you aware of any?
I'm not, but there's an interesting one because Stephen King is extremely pro public library, and yet he's an author that's an Amazon exclusive as well.
Yes.
And I'm like, dude, you know, so there's probably more to it than that, but you know, but Neil Gaiman, here's another interesting thing. In 2 other countries, I believe the UK is one and Finland, they actually have a different model for author payment, but that's between publishers and authors. But they have a model where if a library buys it, an author gets paid a certain amount based on library circulation.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that.
Well, I like it theoretically from an author perspective. I don't know if I like it from my perspective yet as a collection person,
but I mean,
I like it.
If we're arguing about being treated fairly and equitably, we need to be willing to extend that same thing. It's the same way. We're not trying to get things for free. We want to pay what's appropriate.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that could be another, and I have no idea what those models are. I need to dip into that a lot more now that we're looking at this. So.
Okay.
Hey, Gary, is that enough to-dos? Are you excited about your new committee?
A little frustrated. So what do we need to do next?
Yeah.
So it sounds like Keith was mentioning that he'd like a little bit more background information. So we as staff can kind of pull together a resource list and send that around to you all. Are there areas that you would like more data to start with, or do you feel like this first presentation give you a pretty decent grounding? Because we can pull more, we can do more analysis. It seems like the understanding the problem, if that's the first part, and then the finding potential solutions, maybe that could be the theme of the next meeting, is trying to figure out what's actually functionable for the library board to do to help solve this, because it's a huge problem. And Gary, you're absolutely right. Eventually it needs a national solution, but we can only start here.
Right.
Yeah. So,
I think you're right. You're saying that we've done step one pretty much.
Yeah.
And now we go to step two.
sure.
In the next meeting, we concentrate on that.
I think that's a good idea. And Diane and I will look into some of the other questions that have cropped up, like, is there any additional data that's available about how frequently we have to replace physical items so that we can use that as a rebuffment if needed? And what is that author model that's available? Because I just think that would be fascinating as an alternative to suggest to people. And then I will also be providing you with the timeline for the county's legislative process.
Yeah.
So you can use that to kind of to build out your schedule as you're looking to continue forward around those potential solutions and how to get there.
Right, right. And Jessica, you are going to send us the PowerPoint that you did with all of those wonderful graphs. Yeah.
Indeed, and those are all from Diane. So thank you to her
Diane.
for pulling the data, making it happen.
Yeah.
And the links you mentioned, but you put some of them up on the screen, but I can't
Yeah.
do it fast enough.
Oh, no, that's fine. They are, they're in the chat, but I will include them in the email as well.
Oh,
With your
okay.
email, yeah.
And actually, I'm gonna,
Can I ask a question? I know I came late. I came in the end of the Maryland legal thing, and I'd like to read more about that. Is there an
yes, I
maybe I
will
can Google
include
that,
you
but-
in the email so
Okay.
that you have a copy as well. And the Maryland one, I checked this morning and it doesn't appear that it's been finalized. I had kind of thought he's had it for a couple weeks now. I thought he'd have signed it by now, but
Yeah.
I don't know as much about their legislative timeline, so maybe they're still.
Right.
Thanks.
It will be interesting to know what Rhode Island does. I mean, that's where I'm from. And I know that one of their senators has been very active in getting money for the at the national level for libraries. So I'll be curious to hear where they are in the process.
Okay, I've got all the links from your chat and they'll go in the email that includes the PowerPoint, a request for scheduling your next meeting, and other stuff that I don't have linked in there yet. Okay, I think we're all set.
Great.
Excellent.
Thanks for all the time.
Great
Oh,
meeting. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, right. Good step, Gary.
Yeah, I am so thrilled, Gary, that you have so much experience with legislation because I don't know how else to fix this. I don't know how else to fix it.
Right.
It's such a persistent, sticky problem
Mhm.
that you
It's
just can't
visible.
figure out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's been
Okay.
20 years since I stepped foot into the Capitol.
Oh, we'll come right back.
we believe in you. It's going to be great. Okay.
Okay.
Meeting
What-
adjourned.
When are you aiming for the next meeting approximately?
It's your choice. When would you like it? We can probably pull together stuff pretty quick in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So do you want to meet on a monthly basis, every 2 or 3 weeks? What's
Does
your
that sound good? Month? Okay,
Okay.
great.
look for mid-May?
Okay,
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. Happy Wednesday,
Friday.
everyone. And Fran, nice to see you. Glad you enjoyed your trip to Mars.
Yeah, it was an Ollie class on NASA work on Mars and then
Oh,
concentrate
okay.
also on what they're going to be doing with the moon. It was cool little videos and it was good. Thank
Good.
you. Sorry, I missed everything here. But
Okay.
Okay. Hey,
Thank
everyone.
you, Diane.
thank you.
Thanks, Diane.